Ladies and gentlemen, life is filled with choices, some small, some seemingly insignificant, and others that carry the weight of eternity. Every morning, we decide what to wear, what to eat, which road to take on the way to work. But somewhere along the journey, each of us faces a decision unlike any other, a decision that doesn't just shape the next day or the next year, but the destiny of our very soul. The power of a single choice is one of the most profound truths in human experience. Every great story, every turning point in history, every personal transformation begins not with a multitude of actions, but with one defining decision. It is astonishing to realize that the direction of our entire life can hinge on a moment, a single yes or no, a step forward or backward, a choice to believe or to doubt. Most people think that change happens through grand gestures or long, complicated plans, but the reality is that change begins with one deliberate act of the will. Life is not shaped by chance, it is shaped by choices. From the very beginning of time, humanity has been marked by the weight of decisions. In every generation, there have been moments when one decision determined the future of nations and the fate of souls. But beyond the pages of history, there are the quiet, unseen decisions that shape the course of our individual lives. Every person reaches a crossroads where they must choose between comfort and conviction, between what is easy and what is right, between staying where they are or stepping into the unknown. That single choice can either lead to a life of purpose or a path of regret. Consider how often the direction of our lives is determined not by what happens to us, but by how we respond. When hardship comes, we can choose bitterness or we can choose faith. When fear whispers in our ear, we can yield to it or we can stand firm in courage. When life feels out of control, we can cling to our own understanding or surrender to something greater. Every decision we make becomes a thread woven into the fabric of our destiny. One small act of obedience can open doors we never imagined possible. One step of disobedience can close them just as quickly. The power of a single decision lies in its ability to alter not only our circumstances but our character. A decision made in faith strengthens the heart. A decision made in fear weakens it. And while the world often teaches us to delay, to wait for perfect conditions before we move, wisdom tells us that there is never a perfect time to do the right thing. The right time is the moment conviction meets opportunity. That is where transformation begins. Many people underestimate how close they are to breakthrough simply because they hesitate to decide. They linger at the crossroads, waiting for a sign, waiting for reassurance, waiting for something external to push them forward. But the truth is, the decision itself becomes the sign. When we choose to move in faith, we activate the unseen power that propels us into the life we were created to live. It is in that moment of choice that heaven begins to move on our behalf. Think of the countless lives changed because someone chose differently. The addict who chose to walk away from destruction. The broken heart that chose to forgive. The weary soul that chose to believe again. Each of these began with one decision, an inward turning that sparked a new beginning. That is the miracle of the human will. It is the doorway through which grace enters. No one can make that choice for us, and yet once we make it, everything begins to change. There is a sacredness in decision-making because it is the point where our freedom meets divine purpose. God does not force us, He invites us, and in that invitation lies both opportunity and responsibility. The choice to turn toward what is true, what is good, what is eternal. That choice has the power to redefine our story. It can bring light into darkness, hope into despair, and meaning into the mundane. When we understand the weight of that truth, we begin to live more intentionally. We no longer drift aimlessly through life, waiting for circumstances to improve. Instead, we recognize that the power to change begins within us in the quiet resolve of the heart that says, I will choose life. I will choose hope. I will choose to believe. And it is in that moment when a single choice meets the eternal will of God that the trajectory of a life can shift forever. The urgency of now is a truth that presses upon every human soul, though few truly heed its call. We live as though time were an endless resource, as if tomorrow were guaranteed, and as if the moments before us could be postponed, delayed, or ignored without consequence. But life does not wait. Time moves with relentless purpose, and every second that slips away carries with it an opportunity that may never return. The most dangerous word in the language of the human heart is someday. Someday I'll change. Someday I'll forgive. Someday I'll start living differently. But someday has stolen more dreams, more destinies, and more lives than failure ever has. There is an urgency that comes from understanding the brevity of life. We are not promised another day, another breath, another heartbeat. Every morning we wake up as a gift, an unearned extension of mercy. Yet most of us live as though we have unlimited time to make the most important decisions of our lives. We plan for the next weekend, the next vacation, the next promotion, but rarely do we stop and ask what we would do if there were no next time. The illusion of plenty blinds us to the reality of now. The truth is, the only time we truly possess is the present moment. Yesterday is gone, tomorrow is uncertain, but now, this very instant is alive with possibility. In moments of reflection, people often look back and realize how swiftly the years have passed. What once seemed distant is suddenly here. The opportunities they thought would always be available have vanished. The relationships they intended to mend are broken beyond repair. The dreams they meant to pursue are buried beneath the weight of delay. And when the realization comes, regret often follows. Regret is the voice that whispers, "I had the chance, and I let it pass." That is why the urgency of now is not about fear. It is about awakening. It is about realizing that the decisions we postpone today may determine whether we ever reach the life we were meant to live. The urgency of now is not only about time, it is about eternity. Every soul stands at a crossroads between what is temporary and what is lasting. The choice to ignore the call of truth, to silence the tug of conviction, to wait until life feels more convenient or comfortable, is to risk everything. The heart that says, "I'll get right tomorrow," may never see tomorrow. The greatest deception the enemy of our soul ever whispers is that there is still plenty of time. But time is not in our control. We do not hold the clock. We are held by it. That is why every decision must be made with the awareness that today may be our only chance to make it. In the rhythm of life, there are divine moments, windows of opportunity when the spirit stirs, when the heart softens, when the truth becomes clear. Those moments are sacred. They do not linger forever. If we ignore them, the heart grows hard, the voice grows faint, and what once felt urgent becomes easy to dismiss. That is why the wise learn to respond quickly. They understand that hesitation can be the difference between breakthrough and bondage. When the call comes, when the prompting rises, when conviction whispers, now is the time. The wise heart says yes without delay. The urgency of now is also a call to live with purpose, to stop drifting through the hours as though they were infinite. It challenges us to love more deeply, forgive more freely, and act more boldly. To reach out to the hurting before it's too late, to speak words of kindness before silence steals the chance, to turn toward faith before fear hardens the heart, because every moment carries eternal weight. What we do now echoes beyond the boundaries of time. Life is not meant to be lived in postponement. The longer we wait to decide, to change, to surrender, the more difficult it becomes. Every delay strengthens the chains of complacency. But the instant we choose to act, something miraculous happens. The weight of hesitation lifts, and we begin to move in the rhythm of divine timing. That is the beauty of urgency. It reminds us that every second counts, that every breath is sacred, that every choice is a seed planted in eternity. There are moments when the voice of God speaks quietly but unmistakably to the heart, saying, "Now is the time." Not next week, not when life feels easier, not when the circumstances align. Now. Because in the span of eternity, now is all we truly have. The decisions made in this moment can change the direction of a life, the destiny of a soul, and the story that eternity will tell. Hope in uncertainty is the quiet anchor of the soul, the light that refuses to go out even when the night seems endless. Life is filled with moments that shake our confidence, times when the path ahead disappears in fog, when prayers seem unanswered, and when every effort feels wasted. It is in these seasons of uncertainty that hope becomes more than a feeling. It becomes a lifeline. Hope does not deny reality. It simply declares that reality is not the whole story. It reminds us that beyond the pain there is purpose, beyond the waiting there is wisdom, and beyond the struggle there is strength being born within us. Uncertainty has a way of revealing what we truly trust in. When everything is clear and predictable, it is easy to have confidence. But when the familiar is stripped away, when the outcomes are unknown, and when control slips through our fingers, we are faced with a defining choice. Will we let fear rule, or will we hold on to hope? Hope does not always come naturally. It is often a deliberate decision to believe that something good can still come from the ashes. It is choosing to lift our eyes when circumstances tell us to give up. In uncertainty, hope becomes the quiet defiance of the heart that refuses to let despair have the final word. There is something sacred about the moments when we are forced to wait without knowing the outcome. Waiting tests the depth of our trust. It strips away our illusions of control and brings us to a place where faith is no longer theory. It becomes our breath. Hope is what sustains us there. It whispers that even though we cannot see the destination, the journey still has meaning. It reminds us that God is not absent in the silence, but working in ways we cannot yet perceive. The truth is that uncertainty is not a sign of abandonment. It is often an invitation to grow deeper roots of faith. Hope thrives not in perfect conditions, but in the soil of struggle. When we lose our sense of certainty, everything feels fragile. The plans we built crumble, the paths we relied on disappear, and the future we imagined seems unreachable. But it is often in those very moments that transformation begins. Hope reorients our perspective. It teaches us to look not at what we've lost, but at what can still be gained. It shifts our focus from the temporary to the eternal. When everything else fades, hope stands firm because it is not based on circumstance, but on the unchanging character of God. The winds of life may blow hard, but they cannot extinguish the flame of a heart that has learned to trust in something greater than itself. Hope in uncertainty also teaches us compassion. When we walk through our own valleys, we learn to see others differently. The pain we endure softens our hearts toward those who suffer. Hope gives us the courage to stand beside them, to remind them that no storm lasts forever. It turns our trials into testimonies and our struggles into sources of strength for others. The uncertainty that once felt like a curse becomes a means of grace, a reminder that even when we cannot see the whole picture, we are part of a story far larger than ourselves. There is a deep peace that comes when we realize that we do not have to know all the answers to trust that there is one. Hope allows us to live fully even when life feels unfinished. It gives us the strength to keep walking when the road is unclear, and the courage to believe that beauty can rise from broken places. It does not promise the absence of pain, but it promises that pain will not have the last word. In uncertainty, hope holds us steady. It whispers that what feels like the end may only be the beginning, that what feels lost may one day return in a different form, that what feels meaningless now may one day reveal its purpose. Hope is not passive. It is an active force that moves us forward even when we have no map. It keeps us praying when answers delay, keeps us loving when it hurts, keeps us believing when reason tells us not to. Hope reminds us that darkness does not mean defeat. It simply means dawn has not yet arrived. And so even in the most uncertain seasons of life, we hold on, we keep our eyes lifted, our hearts open, and our spirits anchored, trusting that the one who brought us this far will not leave us here. Faith over fear is one of the most powerful principles that defines the difference between a life of peace and a life of paralysis. Fear has an incredible ability to dominate the human heart. It creeps in quietly, disguising itself as caution, reason, or self-preservation, until it begins to control our every thought and decision. Fear whispers that we are not strong enough, not worthy enough, not capable enough to move forward. It paints the future in shades of uncertainty and convinces us that stepping out in faith is too risky. Yet, faith speaks another language. It doesn't deny that fear exists. It simply refuses to bow to it. Faith looks at the same storm, the same challenge, the same unknown future, and declares that God is greater. Where fear paralyzes, faith propels. Every great act of courage begins in the tension between fear and faith. The human heart is not immune to anxiety or doubt. Those emotions are part of our frailty. But faith is the force that lifts us beyond what we see and feel. It is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward in spite of it. Faith does not wait for perfect conditions or clear evidence. It takes the first step while the path is still uncertain, trusting that each step taken in obedience will reveal the next. Fear demands assurance before action. Faith finds assurance in the very act of trusting. Throughout life, there are countless moments when we must choose which voice we will listen to. Fear says, "What if you fail?" Faith answers, "What if this is the moment you were made for?" Fear says, "You don't have what it takes." Faith responds, "With God, all things are possible." Fear magnifies obstacles until they seem insurmountable. Faith magnifies God until the obstacles shrink in His presence. It is not that faith eliminates the reality of the storm. It simply shifts our focus from the storm to the one who commands it. The difference lies in perspective. Where fear looks around, faith looks up. Fear often finds its strength in our past. It reminds us of every mistake, every disappointment, every door that closed. It convinces us that history will repeat itself. But faith is rooted in a different memory. It remembers the times we made it through, the moments we were carried, the doors that opened when we least expected. Faith draws strength not from what has gone wrong, but from the evidence of grace that has already carried us this far. It lifts our gaze from what was lost to what can still be redeemed. And in that shift, fear begins to lose its grip. Choosing faith over fear is not an easy choice, but it is a necessary one. Fear feels safer because it keeps us within familiar boundaries, but those boundaries often become prisons. Faith, on the other hand, calls us beyond what we can control. It asks us to trust that there is purpose in what we cannot yet understand. It demands courage, but it also brings freedom. When we live by faith, we are no longer chained to the what-ifs of life. We begin to experience the peace that comes from knowing that even if the path ahead is uncertain, the one who leads us is not. Every person who has ever done something meaningful has faced fear. The difference between those who move forward and those who stay behind is not the absence of fear, but the presence of faith. Faith transforms trembling hands into tools of purpose. It turns hesitation into movement and weakness into strength. It takes the smallest seed of belief and grows it into something powerful enough to move mountains. It reminds us that fear cannot survive in the presence of trust. When faith takes its rightful place, it quiets the noise of fear and replaces it with peace. It doesn't always remove the struggle, but it gives meaning to it. It doesn't promise that life will be easy, but it promises that we will never face it alone. Fear thrives in uncertainty, but faith thrives in surrender. And when the heart learns to surrender, it finds the courage to face anything. Because faith, at its core, is not built on what we can see, it is built on who we know God to be. And when we trust Him, fear loses its voice. Transformation through surrender is one of the deepest paradoxes of life and faith. Everything in our human nature tells us that strength is found in control, that victory comes from striving, and that freedom is achieved by holding tightly to what we desire. Yet the truth is entirely the opposite. The greatest transformation a person can experience begins not in control, but in letting go. It begins when we stop fighting for our own way and open our hearts to something greater. Surrender is not weakness. It is the moment we lay down the burden of self-reliance and discover the strength of divine grace. There comes a point in every life when we realize that our own wisdom, our own plans, and our own power can only take us so far. We try to fix what is broken, to heal what hurts, to manage what feels unmanageable. But no matter how hard we work, peace remains elusive. The truth is that transformation does not happen by force. It happens when we release the illusion of control and allow God to do what only He can do. Surrender is not the end of effort. It is the redirection of it. It shifts our focus from what we can achieve to what God can accomplish through us. The beauty of surrender is that it creates space for something new. When we hold on too tightly to our own plans, we leave no room for divine intervention. We fill our lives with striving, with fear of failure, with constant exhaustion. But when we finally release our grip and say, "Not my will, but yours," something remarkable happens. The weight lifts, the striving ceases, and we begin to feel a peace that defies understanding. It is in that stillness, in that quiet yielding of the heart, that transformation begins. The person who once felt bound by fear begins to walk in courage. The one who carried shame begins to experience forgiveness. The soul that once wandered in confusion begins to find purpose. True surrender is not about giving up, it is about giving over. It is an act of trust that says, "I may not understand what is happening, but I believe that you do." It is the moment when faith moves from the mind to the heart. We stop trying to earn love and start receiving it. We stop trying to prove our worth and begin to understand that we already have it. That shift changes everything. Transformation is not the result of human determination. It is the fruit of divine partnership. God does not force change upon us. He invites us into it. And when we accept that invitation with a surrendered heart, the process of renewal begins from the inside out. The world often teaches us that surrender means defeat, but in the spiritual life, it is the very definition of victory. It is the place where battles end and healing begins. When we surrender our pride, humility grows. When we surrender our anger, peace returns. When we surrender our fear, faith takes root. And when we surrender our pain, hope finds its way back into the heart. Transformation is not an instant event. It is a journey that unfolds as we continue to yield more of ourselves each day. Every time we let go of what no longer serves us, we make room for what God intends for us. Surrender also brings clarity. When we stop trying to control every outcome, our eyes begin to see differently. We start to recognize the hand of God in places we once overlooked. We begin to understand that the delays, the detours, and even the disappointments were not signs of abandonment, but part of a greater design. Through surrender, we learn to trust the timing of our transformation. We realize that growth often comes through pruning, that healing often requires release, and that renewal often begins in brokenness. It is only when we surrender that the deepest parts of us are touched by grace. The walls we've built to protect ourselves begin to fall, and light enters the places that have been dark for too long. Surrender allows the soul to breathe again. It opens the heart to love, the mind to truth, and the spirit to freedom. Transformation through surrender is the great exchange. Our weakness for His strength, our confusion for His wisdom, our striving for His peace. It is the moment when we stop trying to be our own Savior and finally allow ourselves to be saved. And in that sacred release, the old self fades and the new life begins to emerge.